All right. Officially, we are starting episode 2 of the Auraborrows podcast. Thanks everybody for joining. Um, if you listen to episode 1, then you'll know sort of the basics of tarot and sort of my background with it, the different influences that I'll likely be tying in throughout this podcast. If I sound like I'm a little out of breath, people watching the podcast on YouTube will know I'm in a corset right now because I did want to dress to match the card that we're going to be discussing. And yeah, today we're going to be discussing the Devil card. And I know that's not the first card of the tarot, but frankly, I don't care. It's a really interesting card and I think like a fun place to jump off from because there's so many um misconceptions about it. But yeah, there's nothing wrong with, mixing it up a little. Um I think it keeps it interesting and yeah, I I don't think I really learned the tarot linearly, although there is sort of this idea that the tarot in its linear form because the cards are numbered, Fool being the first card at card 0, and it sort of depicts this journey of the main character being the fool, and sort of the different people and situations that the fool encounters throughout his life. And as I said in episode 1, like the illustrations and stuff really depict this wide variety of experience, that that is the human experience. So, yeah, one of those things is um, the devil, and we're really gonna dive into it today, but I wanted to start off with like a few housekeeping details, I guess. So for episode 1, I did start filming on my vlogging camera. Unfortunately, it died midway through, and I switched over to my phone, and I cannot figure out how to transfer large files from my phone to my computer and then to like a video making thing. So a full episode from the first podcast with like video might take a little bit longer. I'll probably just upload the video that I have on my vlogging camera and just put a freeze frame in and keep the audio so that you can still like watch subtitles and stuff if that's better suited to you and like how you learn and listen. But my camera's charged, so this episode is going to be um more there's going to be an easier time transferring it. So I have uploaded videos from this camera to YouTube before, so it shouldn't be an issue. Um, that said, there's probably still going to be a delay just because I'll have to do like video tweaking and stuff. So there'll likely be a little bit of a delay between the audio version of this podcast coming out and then the video version. So something to keep in mind. Sorry about that. I am just one little person who has a lot going on. Um, and yeah, trying to make sure I have enough time for everything while still taking care of me. So that wraps up housekeeping. And today, like I said, we're going to be talking about the devil card. Specifically, we're going to start with the art of the devil card that I have created. So I have that here. If you're on YouTube, I'll put it up on the screen so you can check it out as we talk about it and sort of go through what different elements I included in the visual of the card in its assembly, and how I thought about those different elements in their depiction of what the card represents, and sort of how it can invoke specific ideas and reflections on the human experience. So, um, the devil card itself, I'll paint a picture, or you can check it out on the website. Um, as I mentioned before, these cards are available for purchase with a little flash fortune that relates to the card itself. Um, so yeah, if you're a fan of the devil card and you have some awareness of what it represents, it's I can say it's not as terrifying as it kind of sounds. Then yeah, hop on over, skedaddle on over, and check it out. So the card itself, we've got devil in big letters. I was really fortunate to find this in my hefty magazine clippings and collection. Um, and it is all from like one larger word. If I remember correctly, it didn't come from like the word that I cut out wasn't devil. It was something else, but all the letters for devil were included in it. Um, And I was like, "That's perfect. That's meant to be." So, I included it. It has, like, this sort of old school vibe. The D connects to the V, and it's kind of like a vine, and yeah, it looks dark, a little Victorian, but there's, like, almost spurs on the letters, which is interesting. But yeah, there's a lot of dark imagery here. The colors that I used with paints are black and red, and other clippings include sort of dark spaces, or I it's like a locked box in the background. It's kind of hidden, and a goat, a like humanoid kind of goat standing. Um, and in the background is a it's like a piece of script, but a lot of the words are blacked out, and this is like a form of poetry. I believe it might actually be called blackout poetry, where you sort of color over or cross out words that aren't relevant, but you keep certain words circled or visible generally. And from what is left of the page, the script on the page, there's like this new kind of story that's woven. So for anyone who doesn't have access to like a visual right now, there's your visual painted. Um, so yeah, to kind of break it down, we have the goat, which I feel like a lot of us know is sort of classically the symbol of the devil, and it comes more classically from honestly, I think a variety of other beliefs and religions. Um, More pointedly, Baphomet and the Greek god Pan. So we're going to be touching on those a little bit later because I feel like there's a lot of misinterpretation about the correlation between the devil and Baphomet specifically. It's really, really talked about, and yeah, Baphomet is like immediately linked with the occult. I feel in a lot of spaces. So, um, like I mentioned with the blackout poetry, and in episode one, I talked about my history with English literature and how poetry is one of these really great tools for self understanding. So, blackout style poetry is quite literally you going through and taking meaning from specific words rather than the larger picture. Like you're diving deep into the specifics of whatever you're reading and drawing out things that jump out to you. So, in this specific piece, uh, at the time of creation, there were specific words that I felt related and kind of painted this really interesting, I don't wanna say story per se, but how you read it kind of changes how it could be interpreted. Um, and you can kind of insert punctuation at different points. So it's completely your own to sort of ascribe meaning to, and that's what I wanted out of it. So the words, I will try to read them without any intonation or fluctuation in my tone. But the words are love, wish, a moody silence, not broken in serpent eye, my mistress left by cross, white and lost scattered evening. So, like I said, there's sort of a variety of different key ideas from this that um, you can latch onto to build your own interpretation. You can add punctuation, like after love, that could be like addressing someone. Love, wish a moody silence not broken in serpent eye. You know, that could be a sentence on its own. My mistress left by cross, white and lost, scattered evening. Something like that. There are a plethora of different ways that you can sort of break this down and make it your own. And, you can come back at different times and piece it together a different way. The point is, like, the way that I just read it to you, you can internalize that as your way of reading it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that's the right way. So you have to look inward and really decipher sort of how it pieces together, what the different aspects meaning, a serpent eye, what is your mistress, what is the cross? Is that like biblical? Is that a crossroads? Because there's also some kind of like demonic association to those. There's so many different things. But again, the way that I just read it to you might influence the way that your perspective holds onto it for a long time. So it's your work to unravel that, which kind of feeds into the more understood idea of what the devil card represents, I think. So, yeah, like the devil is more about breaking through these expectations and analyzing the self, especially the deeper, more hidden aspects of yourself, the stuff that you might not want to see per se. Um, but yeah, specifically when I was going through this and blocking things out, serpent was one of those words that I was like, this has to stay. Because like it's important as a connection in sort of like an association to the devil in another manifested form, something that's separate from the goat, but still there's this idea of like transformation with the snake because it represents the release and the detachment of the old self. So again, with that internal analysis and sort of breaking away from how you think something is supposed to be done or read or interpreted or understood widely, you're shedding that and moving on with something that you can move around more freely in as your own skin. So that's why I wanted to keep that in there. Um, and of course, there are like more traditional ties um, to the parts of self that we may not want to see. So that's why I wanted like the blackout poetry is like there's certain things that we may be hiding or just not sharing with others. There's like a privacy aspect or something to be erased, hidden, that kind of thing, and it may be driven by shame or like these negative emotions, which the devil card in its general meaning is it's time for you to unpack that. So the last detail that I'll sort of include about the visual of the card itself and how I put it together is around the edges of the card is red paint. And red is not only the color that we associate with like the imagery of blood and therefore life. Um, there's also this representation of a certain hunger, um, and a sexuality that comes from sort of the color psychology of this as well. So I wanted that to be tied into the card really subtly because the devil card does kind of link to sexuality and addiction, which are really taboo subjects. Um, so all the taboos and like darkness is kind of looped together um with the devil card. So let's talk about the symbol of the goat. So the goat has been a pretty common symbol to represent the devil, especially throughout Catholicism and Christianity, and we've seen it reflected in art that boasts this concept of the devil represented as the goat, and the lamb sort of feeding into this idea of like being a representation for Jesus or purity or whatever. Um, so one of the key times that I saw this very obviously in media was the 2015-2016 movie The Witch, which is which actually has what's her name, Anya Taylor Joy in it. That was the first time I've ever seen her in a movie too. So um, but yeah, saw that movie. I think it was like my first year in university. Went with some people from my theater class, and yeah, I was like on my walk home, I was thinking about it and just how like the something like what I thought growing up was just like one of God's creatures kind of thing, um, is now attributed to the devil. And I found it really, really interesting. And, um, like the image of the devil being a goat isn't inherently tied into scripture. Like it's not included really. Um, but there are stories that sort of unravel this idea. Like we see with the Brothers Grimm, they have like this myth style telling of how the goats have the devil's eyes. And it's this whole thing. So it sort of brings up this idea of like where did this come from? This idea that goats are the devil or related to the devil. Um, well, today we get to explore it. In the ever evolving journey of Christianity, Catholicism, and its general domination of other religions and beliefs, um, there was this perpetuated idea that those who worshipped any other god other than the Christian God should be punished. And from this breeds sort of an understood misunderstanding that there were other practices that held values for esteemed deities like Pan, in Greek belief, who was depicted as half man, half goat. Um, Pan specifically is also known for being a little bit of a sexual fiend, uh, a playful god with a very high libido that is chronicled. So Given that crossover with Christian ideas of purity, even the ones that we see today, we can imagine that Pan must have been viewed as this devilish tempter. This is also why I wanted to kind of quickly insert Pan into today's topic. As I mentioned before, the devil card holds some ties with sexuality, which may come across as taboo, something to keep private or in the dark. But the card itself brings this idea to the forefront as something to be expressed, explored, understood as a true freedom. And basically the idea to let your freak flag fly. Um, but yeah, similar to this villainizing of Pan, we have the villainizing of Baphomet, and Baphomet was a pagan deity, and many may hear pagan and immediately think witchcraft. You're on the right track. We all know how, especially classical Christians, felt about with witchcraft. Um, so, since witches were understood widely to worship Satan and have sexual relationships with Satan, and that's how they would get their powers, yada, yada, yada. It's easy to understand how the image of Baphomet fits into the story, as old Baffy is also a goat person. Um, and when I say Baphomet, you may immediately think of the image of the goat headed humanoid whose hands are positioned as opposites, both with like nearly closed fists, save for the index and middle finger, which point out, one arm up, one arm down. And this correlates with the concept of as above, so below. Believe it or not, this image, as we understand uh, Baphomet, was created as late as the 1854 by occultist Eliphas Lévy, um, who you might have guessed is a French occultist. Um, but yeah, Eliphas, his take on Baphomet was meant to represent opposites together, sort of a sense of a balance between things. So the body of Baphomet was not man or woman and had elements of both. An androgynous icon, one might say. Though widely accepted and viewed as a man in society, I would like to think personally that Baphomet is non binary in the fun way of assuming both sides of the binary. Maybe that's just me, though. So I'm going to have a picture of Baphomet up here so that viewers can see. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see the image that I'm discussing. And there are sort of a lot of opposites that we can see in the image. Of course, the hand placement, the sun, or rather the moon up in one corner being white, and then a moon in the lower corner being black. Um, the combination of classically ascribed male and female um, bodies put together. And yeah, another thing in this design by Monsieur Lévy is on Baphomet's forearms are the words, I might screw this up, but Salve and Coagula, written uh, sort of like tattoos. So these words basically translate to the idea of things we want to bring in versus things we want to cast out, respectively. So, this is another form of opposites, but it can indicate this internal balancing and rejection of things that do not serve us anymore. Um, so jumping a little bit ahead, when the Rider-Waite Smith tarot deck was being developed, which we talked about briefly in episode 1, Eliphas's depiction of Baphomet became the inspiration for the Devil card. However, the designer Pamela Coleman Smith took some creative liberties and changed certain things about the image. But at its core, Baphomet is a great representation of what the devil card is meant to represent. Um, so personally, in readings, when I pull the devil card, people kind of get visibly tense, very similar to when they see the death card come out. And while the key ideas more generically for the devil card have been, like I said, addiction, sexuality, the shadow self, all of these things that were taught to be taboo. These are just very small aspects that have so much potential to be expanded on. Um, the devil card in my interpretations and readings can be more of a gentle encouragement for reflection on things that aren't serving you anymore. This could be manifested in your life as addiction, but it doesn't have to be like illicit drugs or alcohol or like really extreme things. It could be, but I feel like for a lot of people, it likely isn't that. So this could be an addiction to overthinking, poor self-talk, behaviors that might impact your day-to-day, things like that. The idea of solve and coagula being a recognition of things that we're attracted to and things we have a desire to cast out captures the sentiment of what needs to be sorted through. I've also seen it come out in readings, and based on the cards around it, there's this idea that you might be hiding part of yourself for protection or fear of judgment based on an external social pressure to be a certain way, to act a certain way, to fit into this box. And there might be aspects of that box or just completely the box itself that might not align with who you are. And I think that's really interesting, and sort of why I brought up the binary and the potential of Baphomet and their representation as being non-binary, because it's more of a step outside of the structured gender norms and gender expectations that we have, which I think correlates a lot with the idea and the archetype of the devil. Um, so yeah, there's sort of this representation of the devil, even in biblical stories, as an angel who falls from grace. In this way, I see the meaning of the devil card as a challenge of the idea of what grace is, who defines what is right, who defines what is the right way to be, um, who defines what that looks like for you, you know? And what does that power, uh, or what does, I guess the better question is why does that hold power over you? Um, Has it changed over time? Is there something that worked for your survival for a long time, but now it needs to be reexamined, it needs to be let go? So what parts of yourself have you been covering up because of this limiting belief? Um, of course, there is, like, the reverse of this card, and I feel like that, like, while the upright version of this card brings to light some of the topics that you might be analyzing, the reverse is really a push to start deconstructing. It's one thing to recognize, it's another thing to do the work. So sometimes you'll get the devil card upright, um, and it's the start of that journey. It's sort of your cue to start looking into it. With it reversed, maybe you're already en route. Maybe you're already doing the work. You just didn't know the name to put to it, and you're sort of unraveling the ways in which you've restricted yourself, and you're letting that shit go, you know? You're embracing this new version of yourself and stepping into it freely. So, um, yeah, if the devil card comes out, don't worry about it. Like, the devil card invites you to re-examine these conditions and decide if you're ready to confront your fears and live more openly as yourself with a sense of freedom and control to embrace what you want and reject things that don't align with you. It's not a bad omen to see it in your reading. It's an invitation to explore what you have left in the dark. Thank you so much for listening or watching today's podcast. I had a lot of fun deconstructing and maybe demystifying the devil card today and explaining some of the histories. Feel free to explore a little more on your own time. And I do want to say that all of this research and my explanations and stuff come from my own personal experience, and the historical context of the cards and what they may represent in terms of the unfolding understanding of the human experience. But that is not to say that you can't have your own perspective. You like It's not to say that you can't have your own interpretation of the card, because your deck might communicate differently with you, and that's completely okay. But maybe you listened through this podcast and you have a bit of a better understanding of how your cards have been communicating, and maybe some things that you didn't necessarily want to see right away. But I really do hope that today's episode has been useful to you. Um, in helping you to embrace who you are and express that freely as as the devil intended. Have a good one.